Okay, so not long ago, I did a video that talks about what to expect if you move to Seattle. I'm going to do a really short video about what to expect if you move to Tacoma. Tacoma, Washington it's sitting south, obviously, of Seattle. And because of that, you're going to have, during the rainy parts of the year, you're going to have a lot more rain. And when I moved here, I'm like, it seems to be raining all the time. Like, yeah, it rains quite a bit in Seattle, and we're talking the sprinkle drizzle type thing. It's not a downpour, what people are trying to get you to believe that it just rains every day, 365 days a year. Total lie. It basically rains typically at the end of fall and at the probably early parts of spring. You're going to have a lot of rain. There's going to be not every single day, but you may have the occasional period where it is almost every day. And here in Tacoma, definitely does rain a lot more and with a lot more fury than it does up in Seattle. For example, in Seattle, the 3 years I was there, I never saw one hailstone. Down here in Tacoma, I've seen hail twice, and I've only been here for about a month and a half. In Seattle, there's not really a lot of thunderstorms. Down here in Tacoma, you'll hear thunderstorms. It's all about the mountains and how they're all arranged in this entire area. So that's something that you're going to have to kind of be a little bit more up to. It's great for gardens, by the way, with all the rain, but that's something you're going to be a little bit more accustomed to. If you're moving to Tacoma, expect to see a lot more freedom in terms of road traffic. Yeah, there is some pretty rough traffic, but it's not nearly as bad as in Seattle. And you have a lot more road space. In Seattle, there are streets where literally almost all the streets, there's parking on both sides of the street, and you have to literally navigate between cars going up and down the road. And it's a bi-directional road. In Tacoma, you have people that park on both sides of the street in a lot of the residential neighborhoods, but it's not nearly as bad. The traffic is not nearly as high. But you have a lot more roadways, freeways, bridges, things like that than you do versus Seattle. So you don't have to really deal with that huge cluster effect that you would in Seattle. The other thing that I would say what you can expect in Tacoma is Tacoma feels a little bit more family friendlier versus Seattle. You have a lot more things geared toward families here. A lot more of your chain restaurants also are down here as well. And so that kind of goes hand in hand, I assume. But you do seem to have a lot more things geared towards families here, that type of thing. What you can also expect here, and I'm going to do this kind of quickly because there's a lot. What you can also expect here is larger yards. Because Tacoma is technically in a bigger footprint, when we're talking about city size, it's in a bigger footprint than Seattle. It has a lot less population. And as a result, it has a lot less population to really deal with. Tacoma wasn't really the go-to place that people were moving to like they have recently. So yards are a lot bigger typically than what you will find in Seattle, for example. Sometimes lots are 2, maybe 3 times bigger than what you will find in Seattle. So if you love a lot of yard, Tacoma's gonna be your place. Now, to dispel the rumor, because there's going to be some things people will say, well, Tacoma's very violent and rough. Do yourself a favor and go to the crime map and see what you see there in Tacoma. Then go to the crime map and look at Seattle. There's not a huge difference. A lot of people are somewhat prejudiced towards Tacoma for whatever reason. But you have to read through a lot of the BS and I can tell you, being here, I just haven't seen the crime that people are talking about. I don't see people crip walking down the street. Not saying there's not gangs here, but I just don't see that happening at all. And I've been at various parts of Tacoma at various times of the day and night, wee hours in the morning, just don't see it. But what you can expect here is basically a lot more of just your normal, average, everyday blue collar type worker versus Seattle. You don't really You don't see a lot of the techie type people down here. It's more blue collars. So there's a lot more factories here than you see in, say, Seattle. And it could be that Seattle has a lot, maybe down towards, south of Soto. But here you see a lot of factories and warehouses and things like that, which you don't necessarily see in Seattle. Seattle has a lot of tech businesses and people that make, bunches of money, which you don't necessarily see that here. Here in Tacoma is more kind of like most cities in the country. That's good and bad for some because the housing prices are going up and the pay is what you would see in many places in the Midwest, for example, for a lot of jobs. So, unless you're doing really, really well, um, in Seattle, you're not doing so hot when you're trying to rent or buy a home. Down here, it's the opposite. You can do fairly decent and work a fairly decent job and still afford housing at this point in time. That's quickly changing. But you can expect for a lot more house than what you're going to get in Seattle. And you're going to pay a lot less. You can buy a house that's been flipped and that looks really amazing, has a lot of land and everything, a yard and everything. Yet the price is going to still be probably half of what you're going to have in Seattle. What you can expect also in Tacoma is the commute times. You can commute to Seattle. Basically, downtown there is the Tacoma Dome transit station. You can catch the Sounder, Amtrak. You can also eventually will catch the light rail line going up to Seattle. You can catch the Tacoma Link, which takes you through the city, and you can catch various buses that will take you directly into Seattle as well as other places. So it is kind of like the hub of the city as far as transportation goes. The Sounder is a big commuter line that also goes all the way down to Lakewood. It goes all the way up to King Street in downtown Seattle. That commute time by train is probably going to be in the neighborhood of about an hour and a half or so. If you take the bus, it's going to take you about an hour and 10-15 minutes. Bus is a little bit faster because it's going to use a lot of HOV lanes, things like that. The train, it's humongous and massive. Comfortability, it's probably a little bit more comfortable on the train versus the bus. Bus typically is going to be standing room only a lot of times whenever you're going in the morning and coming back. That's just the reality of it. Taking the train, it's like a mad rush of people leaving. There's going to be 3 levels that you can actually sit on the train as you're going into the city. Right now, it's 8 cars long. I think they're going to expand it to 10 cars long because the South line is so popular at this point that they're needing to add more capacity to the train line. So that's something you can expect. So a lot of people make a lot of money up in Seattle and then they live down here. So in Noelle's case, it makes much more sense to buy a house down here but keep the salary and everything else from Seattle. Lots of people are doing that. That's the smartest thing you can really truly do versus trying to figure out how to make it work in Seattle. Just my opinion. Nothing against Seattle. I think Seattle is one of the best cities in the world. But that is pretty much my take on what to expect if you come down to Tacoma and live. There's going to be a difference in weather, obviously. There's going to be a difference in price. There's going to be a lot of commuter options that you can use. A lot more friendlier people, in my opinion. More family-oriented type town. Overall, bigger yards that you can probably expect. More house for your money. And also, it would look a lot more better in many cases, too. That's it. Hope you enjoyed the video. And until next time.